For most of human history, reality was assumed to be singular. One world, one timeline, one unfolding sequence of causes and effects. What you experienced was what existed. What you perceived was what was real. But over the last century, that assumption has been steadily eroded, not by mystics or philosophers, but by physicists, neuroscientists, and consciousness researchers who keep running into the same problem from different directions. The math works, the experiments repeat, the observations line up, yet the picture they describe doesn't look like a single reality at all. It looks layered, split, overlapping, as if human beings are operating inside more than one version of existence at the same time. This idea does not require belief in anything supernatural. It emerges from established scientific frameworks. Quantum mechanics, relativity, cognitive neuroscience, and information theory all independently suggest that what we call reality may not be a unified structure, but a composite. One part external and physical, another internal and constructed, both running simultaneously, both necessary, and both incomplete on their own. Physicists were among the first to stumble into this problem. When quantum theory was developed in the early 20th century, it immediately challenged the idea that the world has definite properties independent of observation. At the quantum level, particles do not behave like solid objects moving through space. They exist as probability distributions. A particle does not have a single position or state until it is measured. Before that measurement, it exists in a superposition, a mathematical description of multiple possible realities at once. Erwin Schrödinger illustrated this with his famous thought experiment involving a cat that is simultaneously alive and dead until observed. The point was not that cats behave strangely, but that the equations describing reality do not settle on one outcome until interaction occurs. Reality, at its most fundamental level, appears undecided. Some physicists, like Hugh Everett, took this implication seriously. Everett proposed what is now called the many worlds interpretation. In this framework, the universe does not collapse into a single outcome when measured. Instead, every possible outcome occurs, each in its own branching reality. The universe continually splits, creating parallel versions of itself. You experience one branch, but countless others continue alongside it. What's unsettling is that this interpretation is not fringe. It is mathematically consistent and widely discussed among physicists. The equations of quantum mechanics do not require a single outcome. The idea of collapse was added later to make sense of observation. Remove that assumption, and reality becomes multiplicative rather than singular. But even if many worlds exist, most people assume we only occupy one. That assumption is where neuroscience complicates things. Neuroscientists have known for decades that the brain does not passively receive reality. It actively constructs it. What you see, hear, feel, and experience is not the world itself, but a model generated inside your nervous system. Light hits the retina, sound waves vibrate the ear, chemical signals trigger receptors, but none of that is experienced yet. The brain takes incomplete, delayed, and fragmented data and builds a coherent simulation. This means that the reality you live in every day is already a kind of internal world. It has colors, continuity, objects, and meaning, but those properties do not exist in the external environment in the same way. Color, for example, is not a property of light itself. It is an interpretation generated by neural circuits responding to different wavelengths. The world outside your skull has no color until your brain assigns it one. From a scientific perspective, you are always living in two realities at once. One is the external physical world, governed by physics and independent of you. The other is the internal constructed world, governed by neural processes and inseparable from your perspective. These two realities are synchronized, but they are not identical. This distinction becomes clearer when it breaks down. Patients with certain types of brain damage can lose awareness of half their visual field, yet insist nothing is missing. Others experience time dilation during emergencies, where seconds stretch into what feels like minutes. Some people with split brain conditions can have one hemisphere of the brain responding to stimuli. The other hemisphere is unaware of. In these cases, multiple internal realities coexist within a single person, each with access to different information. Neuroscientist Donald Hoffman goes further. He argues that evolution favors perceptions that are useful, not perceptions that are true. According to this view, our senses did not evolve to show us reality as it is, but to hide it behind symbols that promote survival. Just as a computer desktop shows icons instead of electrical circuits, our perception shows simplified representations instead of underlying structures. If Hoffman is right, then the reality you experience is not a window onto the world, but an interface. And interfaces are not meant to reveal truth. They are meant to function. This leads to a disturbing implication. If the reality you perceive is a constructed interface, and the physical world described by physics operates according to rules you never directly experience, then you are already inhabiting two different realities simultaneously. One is operational and experiential. The other is abstract and mathematical. You move through one while being governed by the other. Physicists encounter a similar split when dealing with time. In everyday experience, time flows. There is a past, a present, and a future. But in the equations of physics, especially in relativity, time does not behave this way. Past, present, and future all exist equally within what physicists call space-time. There is no universal now. Different observers experience different slices of time depending on their motion and gravitational context. This has led some physicists to adopt the block universe view, where time is not something that passes, but something that already exists in full. If this is correct, then your sense of moving through time is another internal construction, not a fundamental property of reality itself. So here again, two realities operate at once. One where time flows, and another where time simply is. Quantum experiments add another layer. In delayed choice experiments, decisions made in the present appear to influence outcomes in the past at the quantum level. The data does not imply that the past changes, but it does suggest that the distinction between past and present is not as clean as experience suggests. Causality itself becomes blurred. Some physicists describe reality as fundamentally informational. In this view, what exists at the deepest level is not matter or energy, but information. Physical objects are stable patterns of information. Consciousness may be another pattern interacting with that informational substrate. If reality is informational, then multiple representations of the same information can coexist. A system can be in more than one descriptive state at once, depending on how it is accessed. This again mirrors the idea of parallel internal and external realities. Even consciousness researchers who avoid metaphysical speculation acknowledge that subjective experience and objective description are radically different domains. You can describe the brain in terms of neurons, action potentials, and neurotransmitters. You can also describe experience in terms of thoughts, feelings, and awareness. Both descriptions refer to the same system, yet they do not translate into each other cleanly. This is known as the hard problem of consciousness. How does physical activity in the brain give rise to experience at all? Why is there something it is like to be you? Some researchers propose that consciousness itself may be a fundamental feature of reality, not something produced by matter, but something that coexists with it. In these models, reality has both a physical aspect and a conscious aspect, running in parallel. Neither reduces fully to the other. From this angle, living in two realities is not a metaphor. It is a structural fact. One reality consists of measurable quantities and external interactions. The other consists of meaning, awareness, and perspective. Both are real. Both influence each other, and neither can be dismissed without losing something essential. What makes this unsettling is how seamlessly these realities overlap. You do not feel like you are switching between them. You feel like you are in one continuous world. But that continuity may be an illusion generated by the brain to keep the system stable. Scientists studying predictive processing argue that the brain constantly generates predictions about reality and updates them based on sensory input. You are not experiencing the world directly. You are experiencing the brain's best guess about what is happening. Perception is a controlled hallucination constrained by data. This means that at every moment, there is the world as it is and the world as predicted. You live inside the prediction while being corrected by the external world. Two realities, tightly coupled, never fully merging. The more science looks, the less solid the idea of a single, unified reality becomes. Instead, reality appears layered, observer-dependent, and context-sensitive. What exists depends partly on how it is measured, modeled, and experienced. This does not mean reality is imaginary. It means it is plural. And if that is true, then the question is no longer whether we are living in two realities at once. The question becomes how many layers are operating beneath the one we notice, and what it would mean to become aware of them. That awareness may already be happening quietly at the edges of physics and consciousness research, where certainty dissolves and familiar assumptions stop working. The deeper scientists look, the more reality resembles a system that can be inhabited in more than one way at the same time. One of the strongest pieces of evidence that multiple realities operate at once comes from situations where they temporarily fall out of alignment. Scientists pay close attention to these moments because breakdowns often reveal structure more clearly than normal operation. Consider virtual reality experiments. When a person wears a headset and motion tracking sensors, their brain rapidly accepts a simulated environment as real, even when they consciously know it is artificial. Researchers have shown that people will flinch when a virtual object flies toward their face, experience fear standing on a simulated ledge, and even develop emotional attachments to digital avatars. The body responds as if the virtual world were real. From a scientific standpoint, this is not imagination. It is the brain constructing a reality model that overrides physical input. The external world still exists, but the internal reality temporarily dominates behavior. Two realities coexist, and whichever one better predicts sensory outcomes gains control. This phenomenon becomes even more compelling when the illusion persists without technology. In laboratory settings, neuroscientists can induce the rubber hand illusion by synchronizing visual and tactile input. A participant watches a fake hand being stroked, while their real hand, hidden from view, is stroked in the same rhythm. Within minutes, the brain adopts the fake hand as part of the body. When the rubber hand is threatened, stress responses activate. What this shows is not gullibility, but modular reality construction. The brain maintains a model of the body as part of its internal reality. That model can be rewritten if sensory evidence supports an alternative version. The physical body remains unchanged, yet the experienced body shifts. At that moment, the person is living in two realities. The biological one, described by anatomy, and the subjective one, guiding fear, ownership, and reaction. Time perception offers another example. Psychologists have documented that time slows during moments of danger. Car accidents, falls, and near-death experiences often produce reports of elongated seconds filled with vivid detail. Brain imaging suggests that this is not memory distortion, but a real-time change in neural processing speed and attention. Objectively, the external clock continues normally. Subjectively, the internal timeline expands. Two temporal realities operate in parallel, and consciousness occupies one that does not match the other. This split becomes even more pronounced in disorders like depersonalization and derealization. Individuals with these conditions report feeling detached from their bodies, emotions, or surroundings, as if watching themselves from the outside or moving through a dream. Neurologically, sensory input remains intact, but integration between perception and emotional salience is disrupted. Clinically, patients are not psychotic. They know the world exists, yet their lived reality feels unreal. The external reality and the internal one diverge, both present, neither fully dominant. These phenomena challenge the assumption that reality is a single shared environment experienced uniformly by all observers. Instead, they suggest that reality is assembled differently depending on neural state, context, and expectation. Physicists encounter a similar issue when studying observation itself. In quantum experiments, measurement is not passive. The act of observing changes the system being observed. This is not philosophical speculation, it is experimentally verified. Before measurement, quantum systems are described by wave functions representing multiple possible outcomes. Measurement selects one outcome, but the mechanism by which this happens remains unresolved. Some interpretations suggest that consciousness plays a role. Others argue that interaction with the environment causes decoherence, splitting possibilities into separate, non-interacting branches. Either way, observation appears to mark a boundary between realities. What exists before observation does not resemble what exists after. This leads to a subtle but important point. The reality described by equations exists independently of human experience. The reality revealed by measurement exists only in relation to an observer. Both are necessary for the theory to work. Remove either one, and the model collapses. This dual structure mirrors what neuroscientists see in perception. There is the underlying physical signal, and there is the experienced outcome. The experienced outcome does not simply reveal the signal, it interprets it. Some researchers describe this as living inside a constantly updated simulation. The brain predicts what should be out there, compares it to incoming data, and adjusts the model. You do not see photons. You see the brain's prediction of a world that would produce those photons. That prediction feels like reality itself. Artificial intelligence research has independently arrived at similar conclusions. Machine learning systems do not access raw reality. They operate on representations. A self-driving car does not perceive a pedestrian. It processes sensor data, classifies patterns, and constructs an internal model labeled pedestrian. That internal model guides action. In humans, the model feels immediate and unquestionable, but it is still a model. When neuroscientists alter predictive processing using psychedelics, anesthesia, or brain stimulation, the constructed reality changes. Boundaries dissolve, time warps, identity fragments. Brain scans show reduced hierarchical control, allowing sensory data and internal associations to mix more freely. These altered states are not random. They follow consistent patterns across cultures and individuals. This suggests that multiple stable reality configurations are available to the brain, depending on how information is weighted and integrated. Again, this implies coexistence. The external world remains constant. The internal reality reorganizes. Some physicists and philosophers argue that consciousness may be something like a selector, tuning into one slice of a much larger reality space. Under normal conditions, consciousness locks onto a narrow band that prioritizes survival. Under altered conditions, access widens. This idea overlaps with theories of multiple dimensions in physics. String theory, for example, requires additional spatial dimensions beyond the three we experience. These dimensions are not directly observable because they are compactified or inaccessible at human scales. Yet mathematically, they influence particle behavior. If physical reality already contains hidden dimensions, then lived reality may be only a projection of a richer structure. Consciousness may be adapted to navigate one projection while remaining embedded in a deeper system. Relativity reinforces this. Observers in different frames of reference experience different sequences of events. What is simultaneous for one observer is not simultaneous for another. There is no absolute ordering of reality events across the universe. This means that even at the macroscopic level, reality is observer-dependent. The universe does not present a single, unified timeline to all participants. Each observer carries their own version, yet these versions remain consistent enough to allow communication and shared experience. The overlap gives the illusion of one world. Some scientists believe this overlap is the key. Reality may not be singular, but relational. It exists in the interaction between systems, not as a fixed backdrop. From this perspective, living in two realities is not an error or anomaly. It is the normal state. One reality consists of relational interactions described by physics. The other consists of experiential coherence generated by consciousness. They align just well enough to function, but occasionally experiments expose the seam. In neuroscience labs, researchers have induced out-of-body experiences using electrical stimulation of the temporoparietal junction. Subjects report seeing themselves from above or feeling displaced from their physical location. These experiences correlate with specific neural disruptions, not imagination or suggestion. The body remains in one place. The experienced self occupies another. Two realities diverge briefly before rejoining. In physics, similar seams appear in experiments involving entanglement. Two particles remain correlated across vast distances. Measuring one instantly affects the state of the other, regardless of separation. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance. Modern experiments confirm it. The correlations cannot be explained by local hidden variables. Something non-local connects the systems. This suggests that at a fundamental level, reality is not confined to space as we experience it. There may be an underlying reality where distance does not operate the same way. If consciousness interacts with that deeper level, even indirectly, then subjective experience may not be fully localized either. Some researchers cautiously explore this idea in studies of presentiment, intuition, and non-local cognition, though results remain controversial. What matters is not the claims, but the pattern. Science repeatedly encounters phenomena that do not fit neatly into a single-layer model of reality. Instead, reality behaves like a stack. Physical processes, informational structures, experiential models, and relational dynamics all coexist. Each layer obeys its own rules, yet none are fully independent. You move through this stack constantly, without noticing the transitions. The unsettling possibility is not that reality is fragmented, but that the sense of unity is manufactured. Consciousness may be a stitching mechanism, weaving multiple streams into a seamless narrative, and if that stitching loosens, even slightly, the multiplicity becomes visible. By the standards of science, this is not speculation anymore. It is inference drawn from repeated anomalies that refuse to disappear. The more precisely reality is measured, the less singular it appears, which raises a quiet but profound question. If multiple realities are always operating and awareness normally filters them into one experience, what determines which layer you occupy at any given moment? To understand how someone could exist across multiple realities at once, scientists turn to the concept of the self. Most people experience the self as singular and continuous, but neuroscience has repeatedly shown that this sense of unity is an achievement, not a given. The brain does not contain a central observer. There is no single place where you reside. Instead, the self emerges from coordinated activity across networks responsible for memory, body awareness, emotion, prediction, and narrative. These systems operate semi-independently, sharing information but not always agreeing. This becomes obvious in split brain studies. When the corpus callosum connecting the brain's hemispheres is severed, each hemisphere can act as if it contains its own consciousness. One hand may button a shirt while the other unbuttons it. One hemisphere can respond verbally while the other reacts emotionally without access to language. From the outside, it is one person. Internally, there are parallel streams of awareness coexisting in the same body. Each stream has access to a different slice of reality. This alone challenges the idea that a person inhabits only one experiential world. Memory deepens the problem. Memory feels like a record of the past, but neuroscientists know it is reconstructive. Each time you remember an event, the brain rewrites it, blending stored fragments with current beliefs, emotions, and context. Over time, memories drift. Confidence remains, accuracy does not. What matters is that memory anchors identity. You feel continuous because you remember being yourself moments ago. But if memory is a dynamic reconstruction, then the self is constantly updated, not preserved. In effect, you are never quite the same person twice. Some researchers describe this as living across overlapping temporal realities. The remembered self, the experienced self, and the anticipated self coexist. Decisions are influenced by who you think you were and who you expect to become, not just who you are now. Functional brain imaging shows that remembering the past and imagining the future activate many of the same neural networks. The brain treats both as simulations. Past and future are both internal realities generated in the present. So at any moment, consciousness occupies at least 3 timelines at once. Physics complicates this further. If the block universe model is correct, then all moments in time exist equally. Your life is not unfolding, but already laid out in space-time. The sensation of movement through time is produced by how consciousness accesses this structure. From that view, the remembered past and anticipated future are not just mental constructs. They are references to actual locations in space-time. Consciousness samples them imperfectly. This is not mystical language. It is one interpretation of how time appears in relativistic physics. Some physicists suggest that consciousness itself may be the mechanism that gives time its arrow. Without an observer, equations remain time-symmetric. With memory and entropy, direction emerges. If that is true, then subjective experience bridges multiple temporal realities at once, stitching them into a narrative flow. Experiments in neuroscience show that the brain predicts actions before you become aware of deciding. Neural activity indicating a choice appears hundreds of milliseconds before conscious intention. By the time you feel you decided, the decision has already been set in motion. This suggests that the conscious self lives slightly behind the processes that determine behavior. One layer of reality acts, another observes and narrates. Both feel like you. This split becomes more visible in conditions like dissociative identity disorder, where multiple identity states can take control at different times. Each identity has its own memories, preferences, and emotional patterns. Neuroimaging shows distinct activation profiles for each state. Rather than one reality fracturing, it may be more accurate to say that multiple realities were always present, usually synchronized tightly enough to feel singular. Language reinforces this synchronization. Words allow internal states to be shared, aligned, and stabilized. By labeling experiences, the brain reduces ambiguity. A chair becomes a chair, not a shifting pattern of sensations. Reality solidifies, but beneath the label, the sensory data remains fluid. Meditation studies reveal that when narrative self-processing quiets, people report a dissolution of boundaries between self and environment. Brain scans show reduced activity in the default mode network, which is associated with self-referential thinking. The world does not disappear. The sense of being separate from it does. This state is not hallucination. It is a different organization of experience, one where the internal reality of self loosens and the external reality dominates. Again, 2 realities shift in prominence rather than replacing each other. Artificial intelligence researchers studying self-models have noticed something similar. Systems that maintain internal representations of their own state perform better in complex environments. These self-models are not conscious, but they demonstrate how layered representations improve prediction and control. Humans have an advanced version of this. You model the world, you model yourself, and you model how the world sees you. Each model is a different reality representation running in parallel. Social neuroscience shows that interacting with others requires maintaining a theory of mind, an internal model of another person's thoughts and intentions. During conversation, your brain continuously simulates their perspective. For brief moments, you are partially living in someone else's reality. These simulations are not abstract. They affect heart rate, emotional response, and decision-making. Empathy is a temporary synchronization of internal worlds. Physics has its own version of this. In relational quantum mechanics, the properties of a system exist only relative to another system. There is no observer-independent state. Reality is not what exists, but what exists between. If this is true, then multiple realities are not stacked like separate worlds, but intertwined like perspectives. Each observer brings a valid but incomplete version of reality into existence through interaction. This explains why contradictions appear when trying to describe reality from a single viewpoint. The contradictions dissolve when context and perspective are included. Consciousness may be the interface that navigates these perspectives. It selects one relational reality at a time while suppressing others. Under normal conditions, this selection is automatic. Under altered conditions, it becomes unstable. Near-death experiences provide an example that scientists study cautiously. People report vivid, structured experiences during periods of reduced brain activity. Time distortion, panoramic memory recall, and feelings of detachment from the body are common. While interpretations vary, what stands out is consistency. The experiences follow patterns, suggesting a systematic shift in how reality is accessed rather than random hallucination. Brain oxygen deprivation, neurotransmitter release, and network disintegration may allow access to internal realities normally suppressed. The physical body is in one state. Conscious experience occupies another. Even if these experiences are entirely generated by the brain, they demonstrate that multiple coherent realities can be lived within a single organism. Dreaming is the most familiar example. While dreaming, you inhabit a world with its own physics, narrative, and emotional logic. The external world remains, but awareness is redirected. Lucid dreaming shows that consciousness can sometimes recognize the split and operate within it. From a scientific standpoint, dreams are not escapes from reality. They are alternate reality models constructed by the same predictive machinery used when awake. The difference is not kind, but constraint. All of this points toward a conclusion that is uncomfortable, but increasingly difficult to avoid. Reality, as lived, is not a single environment, but a negotiated space between multiple layers of representation. The self exists across these layers, not fully contained in any one of them, which raises a final tension scientists are still grappling with. If identity, memory, time, and perception all operate across overlapping realities, then what exactly anchors you to one version of existence instead of another? That anchor appears to be information, and how it is organized, limited, and allowed to flow. Understanding that anchor may explain why reality feels stable most of the time, and why, under certain conditions, it fractures just enough for the deeper structure to show through. Scientific discussion about multiple simultaneous realities becomes most concrete when framed in terms of information processing. Across physics, neuroscience, and cognitive science, the dominant view emerging is that reality is not directly experienced, but inferred. This inference happens continuously, automatically, and across multiple layers at once. In neuroscience, this framework is known as predictive processing or predictive coding. The brain is modeled as an inference engine that generates hypotheses about the world and updates them based on incoming sensory data. Sensory input does not arrive as a complete picture. It is fragmented, delayed, and noisy. The brain fills in gaps using prior knowledge, expectation, and probability. Mathematically, perception is Bayesian. The brain combines prior beliefs with new evidence to generate the most likely interpretation of reality. What you experience is the best guess, not a direct feed. This means that at any moment there is a difference between the external physical state of the world and the internal probabilistic model representing it. Both exist simultaneously. One is objective and inaccessible in full. The other is subjective and actionable. Experiments confirm this. Visual illusions persist even when the observer knows they are illusions. The knowledge does not override perception because perception operates at a deeper, faster level than conscious reasoning. The internal reality remains dominant despite contradictory information. This demonstrates that the brain commits to a constructed reality even when evidence suggests alternatives. Functional MRI studies show that early sensory areas of the brain are influenced by expectation before stimulus arrival. Neural activity reflecting prediction occurs prior to activity reflecting sensation. The brain is preparing reality in advance. This preparation implies parallel realities, a predicted world and a sensed world. Conscious experience arises where they overlap. When they diverge significantly, the system updates. When they align closely, the system feels stable. Psychiatric and neurological conditions reveal what happens when alignment fails. In schizophrenia, predictive hierarchies are disrupted. The brain assigns excessive significance to random stimuli, leading to delusions and hallucinations. External reality has not changed, but internal reality loses constraint. Patients experience a world that feels real but does not correspond to shared external conditions. Clinically, these experiences are not imaginary. They are internally coherent realities generated by the same mechanisms that produce normal perception. In depersonalization disorder, integration between emotional and perceptual networks is reduced. Patients report feeling unreal or detached despite intact sensory processing. The world is recognized intellectually but not experienced emotionally. Two realities coexist: cognitive acknowledgement and experiential absence. Neuroimaging confirms altered connectivity between limbic regions and cortical sensory areas. The physical world remains unchanged. The internal world is altered. From a scientific standpoint, this is strong evidence that reality is layered rather than singular. Physics encounters an analogous structure. In quantum mechanics, systems are described by wave functions that encode probabilities, not certainties. The wave function evolves deterministically according to the Schrödinger equation, but measurement yields discrete outcomes. The unresolved issue is not measurement itself, but why one outcome is experienced instead of many. Decoherence theory explains how interactions with the environment suppress interference between possible states, making outcomes appear classical. However, decoherence does not select a single outcome. It only explains why alternatives stop interacting. This leaves open the question of coexistence. Some interpretations conclude that all outcomes persist in non-interacting branches. Others conclude that outcomes exist only relative to observers. Both imply multiple realities existing simultaneously, either ontologically or relationally. Experiments on quantum entanglement reinforce this. Entangled particles exhibit correlations that cannot be explained by local variables. Measurements performed on one particle instantaneously affect the state description of the other, regardless of distance. Importantly, no signal travels between them. The correlation exists outside classical spacetime constraints. This implies that the underlying reality described by quantum theory does not align with the spatial reality humans experience. The experienced world is a projection or subset of a deeper structure. Relativity supports this layered view. According to special relativity, simultaneity is not absolute. Events that appear simultaneous to one observer are not simultaneous to another moving at a different velocity. There is no universal present. This means the experienced now is observer-dependent. Each observer inhabits a distinct temporal reality consistent with physical law, but incompatible with others at a global level. Yet communication remains possible because these realities overlap locally. General relativity further complicates matters by showing that time flows at different rates depending on gravitational potential. Clocks on satellites tick faster than clocks on Earth. Time itself is not uniform. Thus, even within physical reality, multiple temporal realities operate concurrently. In neuroscience, similar findings appear. Studies on time perception show that the brain integrates sensory information over windows of up to several hundred milliseconds. What feels like a single moment is actually an average construct. The present is not instantaneous. It is a temporal integration zone. This means the experienced present does not correspond to a precise physical moment. It is an internal construct overlapping multiple physical instants. Again, two realities coexist: physical time and experienced time. Memory research confirms this layered structure. The hippocampus encodes spatial and temporal relationships, allowing the brain to simulate past and future scenarios. These simulations activate the same neural circuits used for perception. From the brain's perspective, imagined, remembered, and perceived events differ primarily in sensory constraint, not structure. This means imagined realities and perceived realities coexist neurally. The brain does not strictly separate what is real from what is simulated. It assigns confidence levels. Dreaming demonstrates this clearly. During REM sleep, sensory input is suppressed while internal simulation dominates. The dream world feels real until awakening reintroduces external constraints. Both worlds exist. Attention shifts between them. Artificial intelligence models mirror this architecture. Modern AI systems operate on internal representations rather than direct environmental access. World models allow agents to simulate outcomes before acting. These simulations guide behavior even when they do not correspond exactly to the environment. In humans, this capacity is vastly more complex. You simulate conversations before having them. You replay past interactions. You imagine futures that never occur. These simulations influence emotions, physiology, and decisions. From a functional perspective, these simulated realities are real in their effects. Social neuroscience shows that group behavior depends on shared reality models. Norms, laws, money, and institutions exist only because enough individuals agree on their internal representations. Physically, money is paper or data. Functionally, it is value. This demonstrates that some realities are collectively constructed and maintained. They are not illusions, they are emergent layers dependent on shared belief and behavior. Physics acknowledges similar emergent phenomena. Temperature is not a property of individual particles. It emerges from collective behavior. Pressure, solidity, and phase transitions are not fundamental but arise from interactions. Likewise, experienced reality may be an emergent phenomenon arising from informational and neural interactions layered atop physical law. Consciousness research increasingly treats awareness as an emergent property of integrated information. Integrated information theory proposes that consciousness corresponds to the degree to which a system integrates information. In this framework, consciousness is not located at a point, but distributed across interactions. The experienced world is a product of that integration. Multiple integration states imply multiple experiential realities. Critics debate the theory's scope, but its mathematical structure reinforces the idea that reality as experienced depends on organization, not just substance. Neuropharmacology provides additional evidence. Substances like ketamine, psilocybin, and LSD reliably alter perception, self-boundaries, and time sense. These changes correlate with measurable alterations in network connectivity and signal entropy. External reality remains constant. Internal reality reorganizes. Importantly, these altered states are not random. They follow consistent patterns across individuals, indicating lawful transitions between reality configurations. Brain stimulation studies show similar effects. Targeted disruption of specific regions alters body ownership, spatial perception, and self-location. These findings show that the experience of reality can be systematically manipulated without changing the external world. From a scientific perspective, this strongly supports the existence of parallel experiential realities constrained by neural architecture. Information theory unifies these findings. Reality can be described as information structured at multiple scales. Physical reality encodes information in fields and particles. Biological systems encode information in genes and neural activity. Conscious systems encode information in integrated experiential states. Each level obeys different rules while remaining connected. Humans operate across these levels simultaneously. You are a physical system obeying physical law. You are a biological system maintaining homeostasis. You are a cognitive system modeling the world. You are a conscious system experiencing meaning. Each level corresponds to a different reality description. None are false, none are complete. This layered structure explains why scientific descriptions and lived experience feel so different yet refer to the same underlying system. It also explains why attempts to reduce one level entirely to another consistently fail. The evidence does not suggest that humans occasionally enter alternate realities. It suggests that humans are always embedded in multiple realities, with attention and integration determining which layer dominates awareness. The question is not whether these realities exist. The question is why the brain normally hides this multiplicity so effectively. The answer appears to be efficiency. Navigating a stable environment requires suppressing ambiguity. Evolution favors systems that commit to a single actionable model, even when alternatives exist. Reality feels singular because multiplicity is metabolically expensive, but science keeps uncovering the scaffolding beneath that illusion. And the more precisely reality is measured, the more it reveals itself not as a single stage, but as a synchronized stack of interacting worlds, all active at once, most of them unseen. If multiple realities are always operating at once, the most difficult question is not how they exist, but why we experience only one as dominant. Scientists increasingly suspect the answer lies in constraint. Reality, as lived, is the result of extreme filtering. What you experience is not the full structure of existence, but the narrow slice that remains after biological, neurological, and informational limits are applied. Human sensory systems capture only a fraction of available data. The electromagnetic spectrum alone contains far more information than the visible range. Radio waves, infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays pass through your body constantly without entering awareness. Sound perception is limited to a narrow frequency band. Even within these bands, resolution is coarse. Vision is sharp only in a small central region. Everything else is filled in by prediction. Touch is delayed and interpreted. Smell and taste are chemically selective. The physical world is vastly richer than the experienced one. Yet despite this impoverished input, experience feels complete. This completeness is synthetic. The brain compresses information aggressively, discarding most data and amplifying what is relevant for action. Information theory describes this as lossy compression. The experienced world is not a copy of reality, but an optimized summary. This summary forms one experiential reality, while the excluded information still exists physically. Neuroscientific studies show that attention plays a critical role in determining which reality dominates awareness. Attention is not just focus, it is a resource allocation mechanism. Neural signals that receive attention gain precision and influence behavior. Signals that do not are suppressed. Multiple internal models of reality are continuously generated, but only one receives enough coherence to enter consciousness. Experiments using binocular rivalry demonstrate this clearly. When each eye is presented with a different image, perception alternates between them. The sensory input remains constant, but awareness flips. Two realities compete for dominance. Consciousness occupies one at a time. Brain imaging shows that during these alternations, both representations remain active at subconscious levels. Awareness does not create reality. It selects between realities already present. This selection mechanism appears to be probabilistic rather than deterministic. Neural noise, prior expectations, emotional relevance, and bodily state all influence which reality gains control. This explains why stress, fatigue, or drugs can dramatically alter perception without changing the external environment. In predictive processing models, the brain minimizes surprise. It chooses the reality model that best explains incoming data with the least computational cost. When uncertainty rises, the system may switch models. Under extreme conditions, multiple models may coexist without resolution, producing confusion or dissociation. From this perspective, consciousness is not a spotlight revealing truth, but a control signal stabilizing one interpretation long enough to act. Physics presents a parallel structure. In quantum mechanics, systems exist in superpositions until interaction constrains them. Measurement does not create reality, but limits which outcomes can be accessed. Decoherence narrows possibilities without eliminating them. The world appears classical because interactions suppress interference between alternatives, not because alternatives vanish. Similarly, the brain suppresses interference between internal models to produce a coherent experience. Relativity adds further constraint. Observers are limited by light speed and local reference frames. No observer can access the full state of the universe. Each observer inhabits a partial reality consistent with their position, motion, and causal horizon. This is not an illusion, it is a physical limit. Cosmology reinforces this view. The observable universe is bounded. Regions beyond the cosmic horizon exist, but are causally disconnected. They are part of physical reality, but inaccessible. Even at the largest scale, reality exceeds experience. The same pattern appears internally. Much of brain activity never reaches awareness. Decisions, emotional reactions, and evaluations occur before conscious recognition. Studies using EEG and fMRI show that neural markers of choice precede conscious intent. Consciousness receives the outcome, not the process. This creates a layered reality of action and awareness. One layer initiates behavior. Another observes and narrates. Both feel like you. Evolution likely shaped this architecture because it works. A unified narrative self improves coordination, planning, and social interaction. Fragmented awareness would be maladaptive. As a result, the brain evolved mechanisms to hide its own multiplicity. Language plays a key role. By labeling experiences, language collapses ambiguity. Words create boundaries where none inherently exist. Once labeled, perceptions become stable objects rather than fluid processes. This linguistic stabilization reinforces the illusion of a single, shared reality. Social reinforcement strengthens it further. Humans constantly synchronize reality models through communication. Shared beliefs, norms, and expectations align internal worlds. Disagreement threatens cohesion, so systems favor consensus. This creates socially constructed realities that coexist with physical ones. Laws, borders, roles, and identities exist only through collective agreement, yet they shape behavior as powerfully as physical constraints. From a systems perspective, these are real layers of reality, not metaphors. Neurobiology shows that emotional relevance determines which reality model dominates. The amygdala and related circuits tag stimuli with significance. What matters emotionally gains priority in perception. This is why fear narrows awareness and joy expands it. Different emotional states produce different experienced worlds. Hormonal states alter perception similarly. Cortisol changes attention and memory. Dopamine modulates salience. Serotonin affects sensory integration. These chemical shifts reorganize reality without altering external conditions. Brain injury studies reveal how fragile the sense of singular reality is. Damage to specific regions can erase object permanence, disrupt spatial coherence, or fragment identity. Patients may neglect half of space, deny paralysis, or confabulate narratives to preserve coherence. These are not failures of intelligence. They are failures of integration. Importantly, the external world remains unchanged in these cases. The experienced world does not. This asymmetry is key. Physical reality persists independently. Experiential reality depends on biological constraints. Yet physics suggests even physical reality may be observer-dependent at fundamental levels. In relational interpretations of quantum mechanics, properties exist only relative to interactions. There is no absolute state of a system independent of observation. Reality, then, is not a static thing, but a network of relations. If both physics and neuroscience converge on relational, observer-dependent structures, then living in multiple realities is not a glitch. It is the natural consequence of limited access to a complex system. The brain's job is not to reveal reality, but to enable survival within it. That means suppressing most of what exists. The unsettling implication is that the world you experience is not the most real version available. It is the most useful one. Other versions persist beneath awareness, influencing behavior indirectly through intuition, bias, emotion, and bodily response. Under certain conditions, the filters weaken. Dreams, trauma, meditation, psychedelics, and extreme stress all reduce top-down control. When this happens, suppressed information intrudes. Boundaries blur. Reality feels expanded, fragmented, or unreal. These states are not necessarily pathological. They reveal the scaffolding normally hidden. Scientific caution is warranted, but the pattern is consistent. Reality is not singular. It is constrained. You do not move between realities like locations. You modulate which layers dominate awareness. The brain constantly balances stability against flexibility. Too much stability produces rigidity and delusion. Too much flexibility produces chaos. Normal waking consciousness sits at a narrow equilibrium point, where one reality feels solid enough to trust. But science shows that this solidity is maintained, not given, and that maintenance requires constant suppression of alternative ways the same world could be experienced. When scientists step back and compare findings across physics, neuroscience, psychology, and information theory, a consistent picture emerges. Reality does not behave like a single, continuous surface. It behaves like a layered system where different descriptions operate simultaneously, each valid within its own constraints. What humans experience as one world is the result of alignment across these layers, not proof that only one exists. At the deepest physical level, reality is described mathematically. Fields fluctuate, probabilities evolve, and interactions occur according to laws that do not resemble lived experience. Time does not flow. Space is not absolute, and outcomes are not always singular. This level exists regardless of observation, yet cannot be accessed directly. It must be inferred. At the biological level, reality is filtered through survival. Sensory systems evolved to extract actionable signals, not objective truth. Neural circuits compress, predict, and prioritize. Vast amounts of information are discarded before awareness begins. This produces a stable, simplified environment where decisions can be made quickly and reliably. At the cognitive level, reality becomes model-based. The brain does not react to the world as it is, but to its internal representation of what the world is likely to be. These representations are constantly updated but never complete. They include not only the external environment, but the body, other people, and the self. Each of these models is a reality in its own right, running in parallel. At the conscious level, one of these models becomes dominant. Awareness does not contain everything the brain is processing. It samples, it selects, it narrates. The experience of a single, continuous world arises when competing models are suppressed strongly enough to avoid conflict. Nothing about this structure implies illusion. It implies limitation. The physical world does not disappear because it is filtered. Other internal models do not vanish because they are suppressed. They remain active at subconscious levels, influencing emotion, intuition, behavior, and belief. The dominant reality feels singular only because the system is designed to keep it that way. This explains why reality can shift so dramatically without external change. A chemical imbalance, a traumatic event, prolonged stress, or targeted stimulation can reorganize which models dominate. When this happens, people do not feel like reality has changed slightly. They feel like they are in a different world altogether. Clinically, these shifts are measurable. Altered network connectivity, changes in signal entropy, and breakdowns in hierarchical control correspond directly to altered experience. The same external environment produces fundamentally different lived realities. Physics shows a similar dependence on context. Outcomes depend on measurement. Temporal order depends on reference frame. Properties exist relative to interaction. There is no view from nowhere. Reality, then, is not something you enter. It is something you participate in. This participation is constrained by biology, physics, and information flow. You cannot access all layers at once. Doing so would be computationally impossible and biologically unstable. The brain solves this by enforcing coherence, even at the cost of completeness. The price of coherence is ignorance. Most of what exists never reaches awareness. Most possible interpretations are never considered. Most realities are never lived. But they do not need to be imagined. They are already present, operating beneath the surface, shaping experience indirectly. This is why moments of disruption feel so profound. When time stretches, when identity loosens, when the world feels unreal or overwhelmingly vivid, the system is briefly revealing its structure. Filters relax. Boundaries blur. The singular story falters. Science does not suggest that humans are meant to permanently occupy these states. Stability matters. A shared, reliable reality is essential for survival, cooperation, and continuity. But science does suggest that the sense of one reality is not fundamental. It is engineered. The unsettling implication is not that reality is fragile, but that it is negotiated. What you experience is the result of ongoing compromise between what exists, what can be sensed, what can be processed, and what must be ignored. This means that certainty is always provisional. The world feels solid because the brain works constantly to make it feel that way. When it succeeds, reality fades into the background. When it falters, the machinery becomes visible. You are not switching between worlds. You are standing at the intersection of several, held in place by constraints you rarely notice. Science has not proven that humans consciously inhabit multiple realities in the way fiction imagines. What it has shown, repeatedly and independently, is something more subtle and more difficult to dismiss.